Hello, it's Leslie here again at the Handmade in Windsor Lab. I'm going to use a huge range of inks and stamps and a few stencils as well today. And there's so many that I'll do a blog post and make sure they're all listed in there, ready in case there's something you really want to know what it was that I used. I'll pop a link to my blog in the description below. Today I wanted to show you some images of cards that I've made in the past, and these inspired me to do a lot more rainbow background because of course at this time in the worldwide pandemic, rainbows are a bit everywhere as a symbol of hope and symbol of thanks as well. So I thought it might be nice to do a load of rainbow backgrounds, and I'll show you how I made all of these. And then at some point next week I'll probably make them all up into thank you cards or thinking of you cards. So this is all the backgrounds that I've been making. And I'm going to go through each one and some extra techniques on how to use up all the leftover ink. And that's what these ones are. So I'll start out and show you the stamps, and there's some stencils as well that I'm going to use today. And then we'll get started and I'll show you the technique. The first image, this is one from Visible Image and it's Believe in Unicorns, and I stamped it in Catherine Pooler inks. I used quite a lot of the pastel colour ones, and I used the same inks on this one. That's an indigo blue stamp, but it was a freebie in Simply Cards and Papercraft, and they were all stamped in that range of Catherine Pooler inks. The next one I'm going to use, that's Layered Peonies, and it's a recent freebie from Simply Cards and Papercraft. And then I've got some background stamps. These are ones from Crafted Potential. I don't think they make them anymore, but any background stamp is similar. Next up is Altenew half-tone circles, and I'm just going to use the largest circle, and I'm actually going to try that with some Distress Oxide inks. And then this is the Altenew Sketched Evergreen, which although it's a Christmas tree, I thought I could use it as a rainbow tree, as sort of a symbol of hope. Maybe with the top image stamped over it in white embossing, which I've not done yet, but we'll get to that. And then the next one, I thought I'd try the Altenew Bamboo Rose and put lots of the images together because they're quite a thick outline, so I think they might work quite well. And then this set of stamps, this is the first ever clear stamps I bought, and they're actually made by Royal and Langnickel, and I think they might be about 20 years old, so this is a really old set. There wasn't a date on them, but it's a very old set. And this last set, this is the Wildflower Embossing Folder and Stamp Set, and it came from Quick Cards in 2016, so this is another magazine freebie. I'm also going to use stencils a little bit. These are the really inexpensive stencils from Craft Sensations that you can get in the range in the UK, and they're only £1.99 for 5 stencils. I'm just going to use the chevron stripe one. And I've also got some Sheena Douglas 300 GSM white stamping card, and the craft coloured one, that's Lime Tree Craft 220 GSM smooth card in mushrooms, warm mushroom I think it's called. So I've got a couple of my stamps ready set up in my stamping platform, and I've got Altenew inks in Heartbeat, Autumn Blaze, Maple Yellow, Just Green, Tide Blue, Ultraviolet and Purple Wine. And I've also got some really inexpensive makeup sponges. They probably came from a pound shop, I would guess. And I keep bags of these and use one for each colour, or a corner of one for each colour. So the first thing you need to do is start your rainbow. So I'm inking up with the Heartbeat ink to start with, which is obviously the red. And what you need to do is sort of blend the line out so you don't get such a harsh line. So I'm using the makeup sponge just to dab a bit of the ink off so I don't have such an obvious line. I put some paper under so you can see that better. It does help if you're on a plain surface and you can see the ink. And I'm going to say now, it was a really hot day when I did this, and the ink was drying really quite quickly. And if I'd been sensible, I wouldn't have tried to do 2 large stamps at the same time, and I would only have done one at a time. And I did come back and redo some of these backgrounds, which are in the video later, and they actually came out better, and I did them separately rather than trying to do both at once, because some of the blending happens on the paper, and if it's dried too much on the stamp before it gets to the paper, or it's dried out in between colours, it doesn't blend quite so well. So this isn't actually the best example, but it was the first one I did this time, so I thought I'd show it to you. So the same principle, we've gone on to the Autumn Blazing Orange, and top and bottom I'm just taking away that edge with one of the makeup sponges and just softening it. It's kind of like mixing paint on the stamp, it's just blending it out a bit. And you'll see I've missed a bit, so I'm going to go back. If I hadn't wiped all that excess red ink off, I would have been able to see better where the edges was, and I don't actually clean it off after the red, so as you see I've just gone straight in with the yellow, and it's easier to see where the last colour ended and where you're trying to stamp. I've still missed a bit of the yellow, so I'm just going back in, same principle, and then go all the way through your colours. Put it on your stamp, soften the edges, and stamp. Now, as I was stamping, my paper had actually shifted slightly, so my tree has got a little bit of a shadow to it. So you'll see when I come to the end, I'm actually going to spray my stamp with ink, not ink, with water, so that you can see it'll blur it some more and blend it a little bit more on the paper anyway. But as I'm going to over stamp, I think with some white embossing powder, I think it won't matter that it's a little bit blurred because my paper had shifted, and it's obviously it doesn't really matter for the background, and it's quite grungy looking background, which I quite like. So that's the last colour. We've gone through all the colours, through the Tide Blue, the Ultraviolet and the Purple Wine. Here I am stamping with just water from a spray bottle, and it will even out a little bit as it dries. So next I've got the solid stamp from the Layered Peonies, and I'm going to use that one with not so many colours. So this time I'm only going to use the Heartbeat, the Maple Yellow, the Tide Blue, and I've gone with the Ultraviolet as a purple. And what will happen, hopefully, if I do it properly, which I don't, by the way, I didn't soften it. If you notice I missed a step, I didn't soften the edges on either of those, so I've got quite a harsh line rather than it blending. And that's my fault, not the stamps or the ink's fault. I've remembered to blend it now. I think my dogs had been barking at me and put me off completely at that moment. But you can see the line, but you can quite clearly see where I stamped the blue over the yellow, we've got a lovely bright green in there. So you don't actually have to stamp the 7 colours of the rainbow. If you remember your colour mixing from primary school, you can use red, yellow, green and blue. And I added purple on the end because I didn't want the red again at the bottom. So I'm going to do the same thing now with 4 colours of the Catherine Pooler ink. I've got the It's a Girl, Tiara, It's a Boy, and I think I've got the Pixie Dust. And I'm going to try the same thing. I have remembered this time to soften my edge. And this one will be a bit more pastel because I'm using pink rather than red. Again, soften the edges. And I don't use a fresh makeup sponge every time. For the dye inks, I just keep a yellowy one and an orangey one and a red, or a corner of a yellow, corner for red. And I end up absolutely covered in ink. You'll see that my hands get inkier and inkier as I go along stamping all these. And here we go with the Pixie Dust at the bottom, just to add a bit of purple on the bottom to make the rainbow. But you'll see again there was no green, and I've got quite a good green in the middle. So this is the Silhouette flower stamp, which was the magazine freebie, and again I've switched back to the Alter New crisp dye inks, but again I'm only using a few of them. So I've got Heartbeat, Maple Yellow, I've skipped the orange, so hopefully I'm going to get a mix of the orange. So we've gone Heartbeat and then Maple Yellow, and I'm double stamping this time to get a nice clear impression, and you should be able to see the orange coming out in between. Then I'm skipping the green and I'm going straight in with the Tide Blue, and hopefully you'll be able to see a nice green appear between the two. And I'm just going directly onto my stamp with a little bit more of the blue because I decided I needed a little bit more overlap, but to get a bit more control I put it directly on with the sponge. Then I think this is the Ultraviolet. Again, I could have switched back to the red to mix it with the blue to get a purple, but I thought it worked quite well, just adding the purple, and I'm going to a pink at the end. But with the shorter stamp, you could switch back to red, and then you get purple to mixed with the blue. And that's purple wine on the end there, to add a bit of a pink tone on the end. But it's the same principle all the way through. Pick your colours, stamp, add it to the stamp, soften it out, and hopefully on there you can see the green and the orange. I've moved on now to the Alter New stamps, and I'm going to start just with the bamboo rose at the top there. And I'm using the Catherine Pullerix. I've swapped to Rocking Red, and I think I've got Tutti Frutti, Tiara, Garden Party, It's a Boy, and I think at the bottom I've got Pixie Dust again. So this is less pastel and this is red. Now what I'm doing is spraying directly on. There's a lot of ink left on that stamp. So what I did was I just sprayed it with water, and hopefully I've freeze framed. You can see I've got a nice clear image, and then I've got the watercolour effect. Now this one I thought I'd give a go with this Distress Oxides. I should probably have used the Distress inks rather than Distress Oxide, because there's pigment in the Distress Oxide. They tend to sit on top of each other rather than mixing like dye inks do. It's okay if you're blending with a brush or something because you're kind of mixing it. But with this technique they tend to sort of sit on top of each other and be quite opaque. So it didn't work as well. It did work, just not quite as well. And I rotated the stamp to use it twice. As you can see, but this is the same ink colours on one of those Crafted Potential background stamps. This is Festive Berries, Dried Marigold, Scattered Straw, Twisted Citron, Salty Ocean and Wilted Violet. I did have Dusty Concord out as well, but I don't think I used it in the end. I think I only used the Wilted Violet. Now this is actually the next day, and I've moved the same stamp and it has all that ink left on it, so even the following day I managed to get another impression by spraying it with water. So that was the oxide ink that was left on my stamp. Instead of just cleaning it off, I actually cleaned it onto a piece of paper that I can use. This now is going back to the Catherine Pooler inks and using the darker rainbow. I wanted to show you that all that ink that you lift off on your sponges as you're doing this technique, you can actually use it through a stencil. So I've just got the stencil taped to some more of the white stamping card, and every time I take some of the ink off the stamp, I'm actually going to put it onto my stencil. So I'm just using the same sponges, the same really cheap makeup sponges, and tapping it through the stencil. So as I go along, I'm getting extra rainbows. So I've got my tree, I've got my background stencil in my stamping platform, and I've got the stencil set up, and I'll get 3 backgrounds or 3 cards. We'll see what I do with them in the end, but you get 3 out of 1 set of inking simply by having your card ready to hand with a stencil taped over it, which I thought was quite a good way of using up all that ink, quite a thrifty way. So there we are, the last colour, the purple, and I had a tiny bit left on the stencil, so after I finished stamping my stamps, oh, I've missed a bit, so I've gone back in, there we go, and that one actually came out really well. I was really pleased with that one. So I just picked a paler shade of purple, which I think is the Sweet 16, and just finished the corner off just using it directly off the sponge, so nothing went to waste. And the best bit when you do a stencil is the reveal, and there it is, and I really loved how that one came out, so that will definitely get used. And that's a 6x6 stencil, so I can pop that straight onto a 6x6 card, stick a die cut sentiment or a stamp sentiment on, and that will make a lovely card. And as you saw, I used the ink that was left just to get yet another impression on some of the mushroom cardstock. Now this is that really old stamp set from Royal Langnickel, and I'm just arranging it, all the bigger stamps, and then filling in the gaps with the little stamps, which is what I did with the bamboo roses. And I'm just laying them all out, and rather than doing a rainbow this time, I thought I'd stick with the autumnal colours, and I've just got 3. I've got the Rocking Red, Tutti Frutti and Tiara, I think it is. And because they're old stamps, they're not quite as thick as some of the newer stamps, so I found I needed to... I've got the Misty mouse mat in the bottom of my Misty, and I just added in some of the papers as well, just to lift it up a little bit, just so I got a better impression. But if you've got some thinner stamps, sometimes the cheaper ones are thinner, all you need to do is add a few pieces of paper in underneath. And I used the method to get all the ink off the stamps by spraying it. There wasn't much left on the stamps at this point, and I was going to try and get it to go through the stencil, but this is actually quite a thick stencil. I don't know where it's from. I got it at a craft fair in Farnborough just before lockdown, actually. So I'm trying all different ways of getting all that excess ink off, and in the end I've just sprayed it and smooshed the paper on. But I actually really liked it as a background, and I'm sure I could use that with those leaves. So here we go. Here's a final look at the images. These are the original ones that inspired me, that I'd stamped a few months ago. They're all in Catherine Pooler inks. So I'll have to make those into cards finally. And here's the one that I liked the best. That was with the Catherine Pooler inks. That one was with the Altenew inks, but it was drying too fast. It was too hot and I was trying to do too much. This is the Distress Oxide ink, which actually was better once it had dried and evened out a bit. This is where I just used the primary colours to get the blend. Then there's the Bamboo Rose, which had the lovely watercolour, and the leaves that had the same technique where I got the second stamp. There's the background that I got from all that extra ink, and again all the extra ink where I sprayed, and that's the Distress Oxide extra one I got. And finally there's my smooshed background. I'm hoping that you really enjoyed today's video, just with some techniques, and I will come back later and hopefully show you them all made into beautiful cards. Thanks, and hope to see you again soon. Bye.